Hi there everyone, Lars back with another Rings of Power review and analysis. But before we dive into the undercooked meat and potatoes of this series once again, there are a few things that need to be addressed. First things first, it's hilarious that so many people have recently been asking me why I torture myself with this series. Well, the answer is simple. Hating the show alone or just ignoring it doesn't actually solve the real problem. And that real problem is how bad and lazy writing has become endemic in the storytelling industry. It's important to point out where stories go amiss, how they go amiss, and what can be done to improve them. That way, we can all benefit in our own writing and creative endeavors. That is why I attach writing advice to all of my reviews for this series. My hope is that after Rings of Power concludes, many other writers will be empowered to not repeat J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay's mistakes. Second thing is this. I have a correction that I need to make. YouTube commenter Tar Elenion pointed out to me where in the Two Towers Treebeard explains what he knows of the fates for the Entwives. My speculation was way off base. The Entwives are very likely to have been lost to the far east, so Rings of Power is closer to lore accuracy than I had given them credit for in that particular subject. So, there you go. Now, why would I even bring that up? Why would I dare admit that I made a mistake in criticizing the Rings of Power? The answer is humility. That is essential in order to improve as any kind of creator. Admit when you are certifiably wrong. Learn why that is, and then take steps to do and be better. Not only is Tar Elenion awesome for giving me that correction, but what I've just now demonstrated by admitting this and giving this quick shout out is what Payne and McKay should have done after Season 1 of The Rings of Power. Admit that they messed up, learn from their mistakes, and then take the necessary steps to do better. The lack of that kind of humility and the continuation of their hubris is why Season 2 continues to circle the drain of failure. And because, thirdly, the Rings of Power is failing. After Samba TV released their analytics that only 1.8 million people had actually watched the Rings of Power, Amazon sputtered with this response that no, 40 million people have watched Season 2 to date. But they did not release what constitutes as a view, and people are very skeptical about this number considering that over roughly 67% of their initial audience from the beginning of Season 1 dropped off. That's going from 100 million views to roughly 33 million views by the finale, and that's a massive drop-off. Now still, 33 million and 40 million are impressive numbers, but consider this. The Amazing Digital Circus's second episode, Candy Carrier Chaos, pulled in millions of more views in 48 hours than 4 episodes of The Rings of Power did in 11 days. And Glitch Productions actually made money off of their video, unlike what's been happening with Amazon in the Rings of Power. That's a big ouch! And considering Amazon's hasty response to Samba TV after their withering release of what data they had uncovered, even if we are generous towards the Rings of Power Season 2 in what numbers they may have had, Murder Drones and its somewhat controversial finale got more views than 3 episodes combined upon release for the Rings of Power. When indie animation is certifiably beating a billion-dollar project in numbers, that's when you know you've royally screwed up. So what does all of this mean? It means that while the Rings of Power continues to fall apart, I will keep reviewing and analyzing every episode, because doing so will ensure, at least in some small measure, that lessons are being learned and writers are being guided to something better. I don't want to let these vandals of Tolkien's legacy just have their say as we memory hold this disaster. I want to make something good out of this. And speaking of good things, if you want to really appreciate the hard work that Tolkien put into his universe and the amazing attention to detail given in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy, then I highly recommend checking out this video, How Howard Shore Uses Voices, by the channel Listening In. Please give him a watch when you're done here because it's such a good video. Honestly, it's going to make you feel a little bit emotional. It's going to make you appreciate the gorgeous score within The Lord of the Rings even more. And on the topic of using voices, also pay very close attention after watching his video to how other voices are overlaid the voices of the choirs used to bring to life Middle-earth. So, with all that being said, let's dive into the overview of this latest episode. Now, let me actually say off the bat something that's going to seem rather controversial, just given everything I've said. This is the best episode of The Rings of Power to date, at least in my personal opinion. I was engaged throughout most of this episode. I really liked what they did with Sauron. I thought that this was really good considering all of the other problems that they had built in for themselves and a lot of the other stupid things that they did. The unfortunate thing is that there's so much stupidity wrapped up in this series that this one episode alone does not redeem the show at all. In fact, this episode is laden with multiple problems, and I will get into those in time. But let's have a look at how two side plots actually intertwined wonderfully to complement each other, and that's really what took up the majority of this episode. And so it felt actually very concise. It felt like it was on track for the most part, and it felt like we were really advancing the storyline because we were finally focusing on the Rings of Power. Now, after skipping over the forging of the Dwarven Rings, which would have been nice to see, the Dwarven Rings are delivered to Durin III, who, as he uses one, immediately is corrupted by the power of the ring, and yet he is given amazing insights and knowledge into Moria, into its very structure, and he's able to, with his own bare hands, bring the sunlight back into Moria and give life once again to their crops. And after he has done this, he is saying, "We are not bound by the sun, we bring the sun to us." Contradictions galore! Also, I love how he tells his son Durin IV, "Give me your axe, boy!" And so Durin IV hands him his pick. "Yes, give me your axe! Ha-ha! That is not an axe, that is a pick." Please, the dwarves would know the difference between an axe and a stone pick. Also, it's so stupid. The dwarves are like, "This is a wall that helps maintain the foundations." No, that is a wall that leads to the outside. You mean to tell me that the dwarves had no idea about the engineering for their own mines, that they thought they were further down than they actually were way up, that close to the air? No. Skilled miners would know where they are. The dwarves come across as supremely stupid throughout this episode. In any case, though, Durin III, thanks to the power of the ring, has saved Moria, and no longer will he need Disa and her singers in order to cultivate the life of the mountain. And now we must dig deeper. There's so much gold waiting for us. Not only that, but Durin III begins to use the other 6 dwarven rings as leverage against the other dwarven lords, stating that if they want to be rich, if they want to protect their kingdoms from the vile powers that are emanating from Mordor, that what they must do then is they must get these rings. But in order to get these rings, they must hand over a half of all of their earnings annually, or at least half of their earnings up front. It's a little bit difficult to say, but it is a heavy tax for the ring. And not only that, but Durin III is now taxing all of his people basically for a living, because he says, "You live to me thanks to my ring, ha! Therefore you will give me your money." Now, of course, this doesn't sit well with a lot of the dwarves. It doesn't sit well particularly with Disa and with Durin IV. And you get Durin IV, who is desperately trying to expose knows that there's something wrong with these rings. He even makes his way out to Eregion to meet with Celebrimbor and to confront him about what's happened with the rings. And thus, thereby, Celebrimbor begins to realize that there's honestly something wrong with what he's been doing with Annatar, and that perhaps creating the 9 rings for men is the wrong thing to do. Which is really good on Durin the Fourth's part, and Durin the Fourth swallows his pride yet again to go and confront his father about the use of the ring. Meanwhile, Durin the Third is beginning to realize that something is not quite right. And it's sad to see, because if we had actually gotten more of Durin the Third's character, we would probably realize that this is maybe a stubborn yet wise and caring king. But ultimately, we don't have enough characterization to fully flesh out what's happening here. But the king realizes that something is amiss, and he actually does take off his ring from time to time because it's doing something to him. He doesn't fully understand what, but he realizes that he's now going through these mood swings. He's making choices that don't make a whole lot of sense, that are literally undermining Moria and could lead to its destruction. But he is now possessed by this greater greed that has been inspired by the ring. And so what he's trying to do is he's trying to secure his kingdom. He's trying to do the right thing, but he's also giving into his greed. So at least he does one good thing, and he reinstates Durin as his son and heir. And yet Durin the Fourth is now placed between a rock and a hard place, supporting Disa and supporting his father, knowing that the rings are bad, but also knowing that if he doesn't support his father, it could lead to further harm to Moria. This is really interesting. This was good drama, and I did like the acting and everything that went into this. This made Moria feel just a little bit more real and fleshed out within the series. The thing is that it came at the cost of making the dwarves look really, really stupid, and I will get into the canon violations that come with their use of the rings, because there's actually a whole lot more going on here than you might suspect. And lest we forget, there is the interesting, yet not quite that interesting, subplot that's happening over in Numenor, where our Pharazôn is now the king. He takes a very quick heel turn from elves are taking our gerbs to now we must take immortality away from the elves. They've stripped it from us. Now that I'm king, I see everything. They are actually making our Pharazôn the ultimate power-grubbing creep that he was in the lore, which I actually do like seeing that, but it's an amazing heel turn that doesn't make really any sense. Meanwhile, Elendil basically becomes the de facto leader of the faithful, but not the faithful to the Valar. Oh no, we're not going to have any of that. No, the faithful to the queen, to Muriel. And she's just basically given up because our Pharazôn's now the king. She's blind, so she entrusts everything to Elendil, and whatever now weird stuff she's gaining through the Palantir, which is still really dumb. And Elendil goes to say goodbye to his son Isildur's spirit at the very last little church down there on the waters, where there he is betrayed by his daughter and by her new boyfriend, the son of our Pharazôn. And what do you know? Isildur's second friend, whose name no one can remember, gets killed. Yay! And Elendil is taken prisoner, and that whole little subplot, which could have been really cool. You could have given Elendil actually a couple of really amazing moments to be the hero of the faithful that he is in the lore. That's all taken away because no, we can't have Elendil upstaging anyone. Not yet, if ever. Now then, before shifting gears and talking about what's been going on with Celebrimbor, I will say this. I was so happy to see the gift of the dwarven doors, crafted in fine elvish filigree and letters with the riddle of speak friend and enter. This is absolutely canonical, and I'll get more to this later on, but this was a great scene right here. I think it would have just been a bit more enhanced if we had seen the elves at the doorsteps of Moria as the door is completed, as it's fitted, and both races reach across and are like, yes, we've done it, bravo! We have brought together our own special creations of dwarven doors and halls and of elvish magic, and we are now able to combine them in perfect harmony to create this door that will protect Moria and leave a back way open for constant trade and and friendship between our kingdoms. That was what that was meant to signify, and that scene largely captured the feeling that should have been there for this momentous occasion of elves and dwarves setting aside their differences and really working together. This is the kind of stuff that we should have seen more of back in Season 1 when the dwarves of Moria go and help the elves of Linden build Eregion and create this amazing cosmopolitan city that shares wealth and knowledge. We got that there in the scene, and I liked it. And then, as we turn our eyes over to Eregion, here we have Sauron really hamming it up as Sauron the Deceiver, and he's actually doing a fairly good job, saying all the things he needs to do to emotionally and mentally abuse and manipulate Celebrimbor and his fellow smiths. And we get to see Sauron seeding all of these doubts and false ideas into the minds of the dwarves and elves, turning Celebrimbor against the people that he loves and who support him. It was really great to see how, as Annatar, Sauron pushes the machinations of the rings forward, how he forces Celebrimbor's hand, how he uses and abuses all of these people, and how the young pretty elf, whose name I honestly do not know, because have they even said her name? If they have, I've missed it multiple times. But the elf that Sauron's very clearly romantically manipulating, he's placing her into such a position where she'll be able to betray Celebrimbor later, or make Celebrimbor feel like he is being betrayed, which will further isolate him and cause him then to rely on Annatar, as Annatar, by the end of this episode, has completely usurped authority over the entire smithy of Celebrimbor, and as a result is slowly taking over Eregion and turning it into his second home base. This was all really good to see. Now then, we also got some of the stuff about the experiments of the rings and whatnot, and I'm going to get into why I like that and why it's a massive canon violation at the same time when I then start talking about canon. But ultimately, that's what's going on here. By the end of this episode, Sauron has spread enough lies, enough doubts around that he has everyone mistrusting everyone else other than him. The elves now hang on his every word, and they are becoming more loyal to him, and Celebrimbor is now enslaved to making the rings, and making the rings even more powerful, so that way he can undo what he believes to be the corruption that now he himself has brought into the ring-making process, which has actually been Sauron's touch. So all of this is really good. We're getting more about the actual rings of power, the making of the rings, the distribution of the rings, and what the rings are beginning to do to people. That's all really good. That's what this show should be about. At the end of the episode, we then come to Elrond, sprinting the rest of the 150 miles to get to Linden to tell Gil-galad, "No, you should not send your armies to Mordor. We need to go to Eregion and defeat a legion of orcs." And Gil-galad's like, "I've been receiving visions from my ring, and I will now give a cryptic response, which is right out of the Peter Jackson movies, about how it will take more than just us to fight against the dual threats of Sauron and Mordor. We need more friends. Oh, where are we going to get those friends? I wonder where." Meanwhile, Galadriel is given yet another unearned girl boss moment where she takes Adar and puts a random little needle to his neck, and she's like, "I will kill him unless you let me walk out of here alive." And then Adar's like, "I don't have you here as my prisoner, despite the fact that I had you carted in an actual cage. But you are here as my ally and guest, as we will now destroy Sauron together." And so Galadriel's like, "Oh, yes, sure. I want to kill Sauron. I will join forces with orcs to destroy Eregion." And that is where the episode ends, with Galadriel still being absolutely stupid, Adar making a move that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Wasn't he supposed to wait for Halbrand to actually send him back any word, so that way he knew that Sauron was actually there? None of that makes any sense. And why did they not have horses? If Elrond, Galadriel, and their Fellowship of the Flop had horses, none of this would have already happened. They would have been able to get to Eregion way sooner, confront Sauron, stop the formation of any more of these rings, give him the boot, and the war would have gone completely differently. But no, the plot demanded that they end up coming too late. Therefore, we shall not take horses, because we are obviously missing all the horses that were clearly in the background back over at the Grey Havens. Hey! Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. Yeah, so that was the episode. Now let's start talking about canon. And again, why should we talk about Tolkien's canon? Why is this so important for an adaptation? Again, a good adaptation tries to stick as closely to the canon material as possible while using whatever medium is being used, whether it be a movie, a show, a book, a comic, whatever. It uses the strengths of that medium to help elevate the story to the best of its ability. And again, you won't be able to get everything always 100% correct. That's just really not going to happen. So why am I going to quibble here about the canon? Well, the further afield you go from canon, the more mistakes you are going to start creating for yourself. And that's going to be a detriment to the overall story. And what we see here in this episode is that when they actually focused on the correct stuff about the rings they're making, Sauron's manipulations, and so forth, it was good. The story, in my opinion, flowed very well. However, because of all the problems that they set up for themselves by deviating from the canon, things became clunky and contradictory. So let me quickly explain to you how things actually went down. So Celebrimbor, who is working on gem and magical crafts in order to create devices that would allow the elves to heal the wounds of previous wars, especially after everything that happened in the First Age, and thereby preserve their kingdoms, preserve the beauty of Middle-earth, preserve their cultures and their creations, wished to create magical items that would allow the elves, specifically Galadriel, whom he loved, to accomplish those ends. And this is what opened him up to the machinations of Sauron, who came as Anatar and helped teach him ring crafting. Now then, this took some time. Even though Sauron is a Maiar and very intelligent in what he's doing and very powerful, he took his time to win Celebrimbor's favor and to make it seem like they were working together, like they had a great partnership. During this time, they experimented heavily with magical rings. According to Gandalf, there are tons of lesser rings that were created. Here in this episode, when the one elf vanishes and weird things begin happening around the room, that all actually makes really good sense. That is effectively what's implied in the lore. That they would have had all these amazing eureka moments, aha moments, and crazy mistakes while fashioning rings of power. And that invisibility was just one of many different powers that were experimented on with these rings. Now again, the rings were never intended to actually grant any sort of visions. In fact, the Eldar, with their amazing intellect and special spiritual gifts, would not need rings to grant them greater powers of vision, nor would they have wanted to necessarily hand that off to men who might abuse said powers. In any case, the elves were working on what the rings could actually do, and as they grew in their craft and in their confidence, Celebrimbor alongside Sauron made even greater rings. These would become the 9 rings that Sauron would gift to men and the 7 rings that Sauron would gift to the dwarves as a way of putting them under his control once he forged the one ring. As the rings became more powerful and more competent, Celebrimbor secreted himself away from Sauron and independently forged the 3 elven rings to see what he could do, meant as gifts for the other elven lords, and again especially for Galadriel, whom he loved, to give her a means of preserving everything that she was doing in Lothlorien, beyond just granting her the stone, the Eleazar. So, Celebrimbor made those rings using Sauron's craft, but without Sauron's corrosive, manipulative touch, but still using Sauron's knowledge. Thereby, all of the rings were connected still to one entity, though 3 were uncorrupted. That then means that when Sauron, after seeing all of these rings made, and his plans finally put into motion, he crafts the one ring, puts it on, proclaims that he will gather all the other rings and their people together and bind them in the darkness of Mordor. The elves, who were not corrupted by Sauron's direct touch, even though they had worked with Anatar, recognized him, saw him through their rings. He saw them, and they cried, and they took their rings off because they would not allow him to see them and their deeds through their rings. And so the 3 elven rings were not utilized until Sauron was finally defeated. Meanwhile, the other rings were taken. Sauron went to Eregion. He destroyed Eregion, killed Celebrimbor, used his body as a freaking standard, impaled on a spike. That's hardcore metal right there, as he then assaulted Moria, and Moria had to close its gates, forcing themselves to become isolated, which cut them off from the help of the rest of the world, which then led to them eventually falling prey to Durin's bane, being the Balrog. But in any case, now Sauron sacked Eregion, took all of the other rings that Celebrimbor had made, and then distributed those rings amongst the other races while wearing a fair form in order to manipulate and entice them. Now, the rings that were given to men quickly corrupted them, but the rings given to the dwarves could not corrupt them. This is because Aule, the Valar who created them, specifically designed the dwarves to be nigh incorruptible to direct evil. However, what the rings did do for the dwarves is that it vastly increased their knowledge and their power of craft. And as the dwarves grew more proud and more rich, this naturally led to greater pride and greater greed, which destroyed them from within. Now then, Thorin Oakenshield's family was the family that had the last of the 7 dwarven rings. And Thror, who had the ring, who then gave it to Thrain before he then went to Moria and was then beheaded by Azog, he had told his son, this ring needs gold to make gold, which is why I'm going to go and see what kinds of fortunes we can get. Either we will find them in Moria, or we have to go and retake the Lonely Mountain. Unfortunately for Thror, he got killed, and for Thrain, he got captured, was taken to the Necromancer, which was Sauron. There he was tortured for all his information, and the last of the dwarven rings that had survived the dragons was taken up by Sauron to be used for whatever purposes he later on had. Now, the reason why I'm explaining all of this history right here is to show that by them going out of order with the 3 elven rings, then the 7 dwarven rings, and now specifically we want to make 9 rings for men, and we need to make them more powerful, more stable. The lore behind the rings is now getting all winky-washy, willy-washy, whatnot. It doesn't make any sense, just like what I just said right there. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. That's the problem, is that when you actually stop to think about the logic behind these rings, what Galadriel said at the end of the first season about how there needed to be 3 rings really didn't make any sense. All you needed was 1 ring in order to ensure the prosperity of the elves, and if you needed to make more, why make 3? 2 will divide. Well, there was no indication that the elves are ever going to divide over this. You need these rings in order to survive. That doesn't make any sense. The logic just isn't lining up. Then Anatar says, we need, in order to stave off the coming darkness, Celebrimbor, we need to make rings for the dwarves and for the men. Now, within the logic that the show has created, this kind of makes a little bit of sense right here. But the moment that Celebrimbor was told by Durin IV that the rings given to the dwarves were causing all sorts of problems, he should have immediately been like, no, we are shutting down the forge. In this case, Celebrimbor is just an absolute pansy. He does not stand up for what is right at all. He is not a hero to be applauded. He is not someone to be admired and look up to. He's not someone whose death we are going to be inclined to mourn when Sauron finally kills him. As opposed to the Celebrimbor who was mighty and good and unfortunately duped by Sauron in the actual lore. And the way that the rings are being built up, it makes it seem as though the 9 rings which will be gifted to the Nazgul is just... wait, what? This is supposed to somehow be more powerful? Say what? And one real big problem of making it seem as though the 9 rings that will be given to men, that they are the best of the rings, is just kind of stupid. That they would be the most powerful. The Nazgul are indeed very powerful in their own right, but they do not match the power or exceed the power of the 3 elven rings. As we see in the books and throughout the extended lore of Middle-earth, the ring wraiths can be turned back by very powerful elves, or even by Aragorn. They are not these Übermensch powerful magical beings who can defeat anyone. So the odd power scaling that they're trying to do here with the rings is absolutely unnecessary, because again, the rings were meant to help create and help preserve. They're not meant to grant great war powers or anything like that. That is the power of the One Ring. The One Ring that was actually forged for conquest. All the other rings are meant to bind the kingdoms and their creations to Sauron should he take those rings, that they and their people will become his holy once he merges their power with his own. Like how the Nazgul, despite being very willful, very skilled, independent kings of men, become wholeheartedly slaves to Sauron's will. That is what is missing here, and that is a subtlety that Tolkien put into his stories that's being lost. These rings of power are basically getting billed as infinity stones. That's where the writers are kind of going with this. Not on the same grand galactic scale, but that's effectively what they're going to be. These all-powerful magical objects that are going to tear Middle-earth apart until Sauron and his One Ring are defeated. But that's not the story that is presented to us at all within the Lord of the Rings. So the writers are very clearly creating something else out of whole cloth. It's not what Tolkien would have done. As a result, despite the fact of the thing that they get the references to Irandil, to Beren, to Tor, which were really great. I like that they did that and that they left out Turin Turnbar, because Turin Turnbar is not a hero, no matter what anyone says. Yes, he does some heroic deeds. The guy still sucked! Even though they make great references to these heroes of men and to the amazing door that binds Moria and Eregion together, and that they're actually finally getting even more details of Middle-earth correct, the problem is that they're taking something from another story and trying to shoehorn it into their own fan fiction where it does not belong. The story begins to feel clunky and disjointed the moment that you stop to think about what you're watching. If you just watch this and turn off your brain, sure, this episode is a ton of fun. And there were things that even for a lore geek like myself was enjoyable, but the moment that you stop to think about what's happening, it's all really stupid. Now, let me again just praise what was done with the back door for Moria. This amazing beautiful gate forged from Ithilien is honestly, this is what should have been done. We should have been getting more of this back in season 1. Or if they had actually done the right thing and then extended the series a little bit more to give us more details about how the elves and the dwarves had come together to form these great friendships, this scene would have hit even harder, because this is beautiful. Elves and dwarves setting aside their differences within Eregion, getting together. The dwarves loved Celebrimbor, and Celebrimbor loved the dwarves. This is lore accurate. Now then, the Celebrimbor that is depicted here kind of suffers the dwarves a little bit more than actually loves them, but yeah, whatever. I'll take this as actual lore accuracy. I will be at least a little bit charitable to them for having this bit in. That was good. But from there, again, things just really take some weird turns. Like this whole scene with Disa basically waking up the Balrog by singing to find a gem that she purchased for her daughter? Yeah, that's dumb. So you mean to tell me that the Balrog woke up because a leaf disturbed him and someone sang off key? Oh my gosh, if this is what actually woke up Durin's Bane, all the dwarves needed to do was brew him a really strong cup of coffee and give him a Snickers bar, and this Balrog would have gone right back to sleep. Balrog, calm down. You're not you without a Snickers. Here, have a Snickers. That's basically what needs to be done. The setup for Durin's Bane to destroy Moria is dumb. And on top of that, they got it wrong. It wasn't digging for gold that woke up the Balrog. It was the hunt for mithril. Hunting a mithril vein that went too deep into the earth, where the nameless things of the deep await. Oh ho! Oh yeah, I haven't forgotten that from episode 4. That stupidity. And then on top of that, like, it just, thinking of what's happening over at Numenor, that's just really, really weak sauce right there. Because what makes Elendil in part such a great hero, just like, regardless of his size and his strength and his wonderful character, is that by the time that Ar-Pharazôn takes power within Numenor, there has been a split within the Númenórean kingdom. You have those Númenóreans who remember Elros's pledge to Valinor. That, in exchange for the amazing gifts that the elves and the Valar will give them, they will not cross into the Undying Lands. They will be a people of principle, of art, of honor, of courage. They will not give in to greed. And yet, by the time that Ar-Pharazôn takes control within Numenor, the Númenórean people overall have begun to give into a lust for greater life, for more power, for more dominion, and thus they have begun to set aside honor, courage, valor, and an appreciation for the life that they are given, understanding that death is a gift from Ilúvatar. No, now they want it all. They want to conquer Middle-earth. They want riches. They want honor and glory that can only be won through conquest. And Ar-Pharazôn wants eternal life. Now, he doesn't begin to believe that it can be taken until Sauron tells him that it can be taken if he seizes the Undying Lands, which then leads to the fall of Numenor. Things are being set up properly for that, and yet it doesn't feel right, because Ar-Pharazôn, in his immediate heel turn within this episode to becoming the wonderful scumbag that he is in the story, just felt totally out of place with the guy that was presented to us just 2 episodes ago. It doesn't quite line up. And now he wants immortality. We haven't really, within the show, solidified the fact that the Númenóreans can live for a ridiculous long amount of time. That's not been established at all. You actually have to know the lore to get that, and why they would want to crave longer life, and why Ar-Pharazôn now at a later stage in life is like, no, I must have more life. No, because being the king is everything I ever wanted, and now it's going to suddenly flee from me. No, I must have. That would make more sense, but it's missing. This is why the canon is so important, because it gives us that proper context and progression, the proper events and character development to make sense of what these characters are doing within the story. Because J.D. Payne, Patrick McKay, and their writers group have not done that. So much just feels out of place. Again, if you think about it logically, even within the logic of the Rings of Power, some of the decisions that are being made by these characters make no sense. And it gets even worse when you start paying attention to their dialogue. Their dialogue is becoming as contradictory and as clunky as what was in the Acolyte. We don't need the sun. Ha-ha! But now the sun has come to us. I don't like these elves, but wait, the elves have everything I ever wanted. I must have that. I thought you cared more about jobs. We're jobs without life, son! Son, I love you so much, but if you do not serve me well, just think of the things that I will do to you. Where is any of this coming from? This is all contradictory. And finally, let's just go into this again. Galadriel is not the warrior and the commander of the northern armies who works with a bunch of orcs to set the siege of Eregion. No, this is stupid! This is so dumb! This takes away from the betrayal of Annatar, where he absolutely turns against Celebrimbor and Eregion, where he comes out with his full strength from Mordor, bashes and crashes his way up through half of Middle-earth, conquering kingdoms, distributing rings, destroying entire civilizations. And then he confronts the person who was supposed to have been his friend. But oh no, he was never his friend. The betrayal is laid completely bare. Eregion is destroyed. The dwarves of Moria are isolated, and Celebrimbor is brutally impaled upon a spike and paraded around before the armies of Mordor. Holy cow, that is dark and awesome. Why is that not being set up? No, this betrayal will not work with that same weight and magnitude as it was within the books, because it's very clear within this episode that Sauron is a manipulative bastard who is emotionally and mentally abusing Celebrimbor and his apprentices. So you don't care about this relationship. You want it to end as soon as possible. And even if it must end in fire and blood, then fine, we'll let that happen because Celebrimbor is an idiot. And so the weight, the emotional payoff, the sadness, the betrayal will not be there on the same scale as it was in Tolkien's works because they've abused the canon. So I must once again emphasize and assess that while there has been a more than 100% lore accuracy improvement within this series, and hey, I mean, that's good for something, the problem is that they still make so many mistakes that it completely overwhelms what they get right. And it creates contradictions and clunkiness and basically an incoherency within the plot that, again, if you stop at any one moment to think about what's happening, stuff doesn't make any sense. And when I've talked about the show with other people about what's going on, if they know even just a little bit about the Lord of the Rings or of the books, of the movies, what have you, immediately they're like, wait a second, but some of this isn't quite lining up. Are you sure this is in the show? And I could show them, and they're like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what's going on here. It feels then ultimately like the Rings of Power is made to look like Tolkien's work while not being Tolkien's work, and therefore it cannot pass itself off as a proper canon adaptation of Tolkien's history. So there you have it. Now then, what about this episode as if Tolkien had never existed? What if there was no previous Lord of the Rings work and this was its own independent episode? Well, this is actually where I've got some more praise to give this episode. I feel like JD Payne and Patrick McKay actually watched one of my videos from years ago, where I said introduce a new elven girl, someone who is one of the smiths within Eregion, who works under Celebrimbor, someone who could fall in love with Sauron, who will help Sauron forge the rings and learn from him, develop a close personal relationship. We actually got that! If we had been getting this since season 1, I would have been more on board, because you don't need to desecrate Galadriel's character to create this scenario, because this actually feels way more believable. And even on its own, this actually makes more sense. This brings out more of Sauron's character. In fact, this entire episode did wonders for building up Elendil's character, Celebrimbor's character, Sauron's character, Durin the Third, Durin the Fourth, and giving Diesel a little bit of good screen time as well. This episode was actually very strong. In terms of it being its own independent work, as if Tolkien never existed, this is a really good episode. The problem comes down to the dialogue and to some of the world-building aspects. That it's like, hello, a pick is obviously not an axe. You need the sunlight. Where on earth is all this stupidity coming from? Oh, Sauron, you're kind of telegraphing your wickedness a little bit too much with some of the things that you're saying and doing. It looks like this episode was plagued by a strong first draft. Yes, a first draft. A first draft can be strongly written, but you can still see a lot of the contradictions and just the silly mistakes all over the place. This episode could have been way more powerful given some more revisions in order to clean up the dialogue and to make sure that the props were correct. Oh my gosh. But overall, the plot was progressed, characters were progressed, character relationships were progressed, stuff actually pertinent to the plot was happening throughout this episode. Ultimately, and I loved seeing Ar-Pharazôn being more wicked and manipulative. That was really good. In fact, this episode is the best episode of the 13 episodes of the Rings of Power thus far. So, on its own, I have to applaud it. It's a strong first draft episode. It's still a first draft. Your first draft is not the best it can possibly be. So let that be my introduction then to talking about writing advice. Again, your first draft is not your strongest draft. You need to go through multiple edits. Please make sure that you're reading your dialogue out loud and to other people, so that way you know if it sounds good or doesn't. If it sounds clunky and contradictory to you or to someone else, you need to instantly go back and make sure that you fix it up. And the beauty about writing all of this is that you have the time. Sure, there is the production schedule and everything, but you still have the time to crank this stuff out, to go through the proper review process, and to get critical feedback from other people. And you have all of the actors and actresses at your beck and call. You have producers, you have Tolkien scholars. Put them to use, dang it, and figure out if the dialogue works! Now then, one thing I can actually give in terms of praise of good writing advice from this episode is this. Manipulation and abuse isn't always in your face, angry, I'm going to put you down, I'm going to grind you down, I'm going to destroy you. If we think about what Anatar does to manipulate and abuse people within this episode, he's heaping on praise. He's making them feel good, while then highlighting something that isn't all that good and just saying, well, you know what? And that is a mistake. You're such a good person, but you made this critical mistake right there. And that's your fault. It's your fault. But if I help you, I can make it better. How about you let me in a little bit more? I will be the friend that you need. And then he heaps on more praises. Oh, you're so good. You're so right. But you made a mistake. It's your fault. It's your mistake yet again. But if I work with you, I promise you, I will help you out. And then when something goes wrong that is clearly Anatar's fault, he shifts the blame to someone or something else while still heaping on the praise and the good words. And so everyone is paying attention to him. They believe him. They love him. And he's setting them up to then stick in the knife and twist it and make them do what he wants them to do. This is good manipulation. Most of the times you see manipulation as someone like, I'm going to hurt you if you don't do what I want you to do. I will ruin your life. I will take your money. I will take the love of your life if you don't do what I want you to do. And that's overtly negative, and it can work against weaker-willed individuals, but if you're trying to write stronger-willed individuals who are going to be subtly manipulated and destroyed, then going through their hubris, going in through praise, that is how you can write a good manipulative character. Someone who genuinely wins the love and affection and the attention of other people, but then always shifts the blame around to them, points out their faults even while praising them, and then says, oh, I'm doing all these good things for you. It always comes back to making people think that they are not any good unless this other person who is the real manipulator and abuser in their life is the one who makes their life good, who makes them the best that they can be. That is actually pretty good writing from this episode. So if you are so inclined to create such a character, then take a page out of this episode, and I think you'll actually find that that works really well for your own writing, and it creates a wonderfully sinister character. And on that note, one thing that needs to be understood about any good story is that stories live or die by their characters. Characters need to be fleshed out and engaging. They don't necessarily need to be fun, but they need to feel real to the audience. The audience needs to like these characters on some kind of level, either from an entertainment factor, a fun factor, a personal factor, like I identify with this person, or at least that they become invested in the lives of these characters. Like, I want them to be happy, or no, I want them to suffer and die. You want the audience to, in some kind of way, be invested in these characters for a variety of reasons. And then you build up those characters through their interactions with other characters. One of the ways in which characters flourish is through the relationships that they have with heroes, with villains, with families, with love interests, with bullies, and with just regular characters who pass by on a whim from chapter to chapter, or from scene to scene. Those moments bring out more of who these characters are, that show us who they are in various scenarios and help us to get to know them better, to love them even more, to become more invested. And again, this is how a story thrives, by seeing characters become fully fleshed out, having good relationships, and when I say good, I mean well-defined, well-executed, well-explored relationships, whether they be positive or negative, with other characters, and then showing how all of that takes those main characters on a particular journey to who they need to be. Now then, granted, that's a lot of overgeneralization that I'm talking about right there, and that's always something that in future videos we can talk about even more concretely. But for a moment here, let's think about what they've been getting wrong with Elendil. If we think about how Elendil needs to be the High King of the Númenóreans, of Gondor and Arnor, when those kingdoms are ultimately established over Middle-earth. And yes, I know that Gondor and Arnor basically become their own separate kingdoms after Elendil's death. That little bit aside, Elendil is the High King over the Númenóreans and all the people that they rule over within Middle-earth. He is meant to be one of the best of the best, one of the most valorous, chivalrous, courageous, wise men of all time. And if that's the man who is going to stand up to Sauron and help to defeat Sauron and inspire Isildur to his courage to cut the ring from Sauron's hand, which will unfortunately lead to Isildur's downfall, but that all aside, Elendil is supposed to be the best of the best. How then do you take a simple captain on a ship and transform him into the king of all humanity? Well, to do that, we need to see Elendil having good relationships with other royals or bad relationships with other royals. We need to see how he inspires loyalty in his followers, how he stands up for these amazing values. When we look at this episode in particular, Elendil is serving at the behest of the queen. He's not really a leader, and nor have we seen much that really inspires loyalty from other people. Sure, he is trying to be benevolent and be nice and be patient, but he's not really doing a whole lot to show that he is someone that people should and would want to follow, even into the jaws of Mordor. Elendil has a lot of growth he still needs to undergo, but we are now more than halfway through Season 2, and Elendil is still just a humble servant of the Queen, not really doing anything heroic or courageous or standing up for greater values, other than, "You're my queen! I will do whatever my queen asks!" And as such, he comes off as lame, lazy. I would not follow this man into battle for anything, because he's a wimp. He does not stand up for what is right. In fact, he completely bends and cowers to Ar-Pharazôn's wimpy son and gets a good man killed because of it. This is not a man that I feel inspired by, especially thanks to his bad relationship with Isildur and his bad relationship to his non-canonical daughter. Yeah, there's nothing to be praised about this man as far as I'm concerned, so why should I root for Elendil? Why should I care that he should become the High King of all humanity on Middle-earth? I don't care at all. He's just a character that I'm forced to watch while I hope for better things yet to come in this series, which aren't coming really fast enough. So, if you think about that, and how we are a season and a half plus through what should be Elendil's character arc, and he still has not even begun to show the hero that he needs to become, honestly, you need to go back, you need to revise and review and rewrite your scripts and your chapters in order to show a more heroic arc for Elendil. Show him growing up thanks to all of his experiences going to Middle-earth, realizing, holy cow, there's this great evil here. I might have lost my son Isildur, but that doesn't mean we need to just turn our backs to Middle-earth. We need to do better. We can be better. We are the Númenóreans. Do you remember why we were granted our great place and privilege next to the Undying Lands? We must become the heroes that Middle-earth needs and begin standing for something within Númenor and show him truly gathering people under his banner, becoming one of the faithful and showing that he's a leader. We are this far into the series, 13 episodes, and that still has not happened. As such, Elendil is treading water as a character and not really going anywhere other than where the plot's currents take him. As such, he's a character who, even though that I want to like because he's Elendil, for crying out loud, and they actually cast Elendil, in my opinion, really well, this is not the Elendil that I can root for, because they've botched his character. As such, the subplot of Numenor is even weaker than it ought to, than has any right to be. This should be a fantastic point within the story. It should be a fantastic through thread, a great subplot showing the downfall of this amazing, beautiful kingdom and the rise of an amazing, heroic, kingly line through Elendil. But we are not getting that because the writers are not respecting this character or writing him with a coherent, concrete character arc, which should have already begun by this point. Only now has he been set up to even have a real character arc. You mean to tell me that you had to spend a season and a half to establish a character before they can even begin their hero's journey? That is a load of BS, a load of bologna sandwich. That is bad writing. So again, remember, your story lives or dies by its characters. Your characters are defined by their character arcs, which come to life in many ways, not just through their deeds, but through the relationships that they have with other well-defined, well-fleshed out, engaging characters. That is what the audience wants. Engaging, interesting, fun, creative, inventive, realistic characters. And you can do all of that even in the most fantastical of settings. It just takes a little bit more work, which is why a first draft does not work for this show. Oh boy. And you see, this is why I do these videos. Because there is something good to be had in this episode. Even with all of its faults, there is actually a lot, in my opinion, to be praised. I have pulled out some positive writing advice from this episode. There are some great canonical moments within this episode. I like a lot of the acting from Sauron in this episode, and even with some of the clunky and contradictory dialogue, there are still some really great moments between some of these characters that I would like to see more of. And again, coming back to one of my points from earlier, that if they had tried to make this story more from the point of view of a love interest of Sauron's and not from Galadriel, they would have had more freedom to explore Sauron, explore the situation in the Region, and really home in on who Sauron is as a villain, and let us get to know him better, so that way we either despise him more or root for him more, which is what they wanted, but they executed that poorly. Oh boy. So there you have it. Episode 5 of The Rings of Power. An absolute mess. And the sad thing is that I did like portions of this episode. I was engaged throughout the entire episode. There were things that I actually made some good positive notes about. Again, I am very happy that they did not include Turin Turambar in the list of great human heroes. The guy did some great things, but the guy was a jerk and a scumbag. You do not get Nagathron destroyed through your own hubris and then walk away from that with your dignity intact. And Turin Turambar blamed it on everyone else other than himself. Ugh, that is why this guy is not a hero. Yes, he killed Glorong, and that is a great moment. And no, I'm not even going to blame him for marrying his sister because that's Glorong's magic. But Turin Turambar is not a hero. Okay, so with all of that being said here for this episode, thank you so much for joining us on this sometimes frustrating adventure that we call writing. I would like to know your thoughts, your opinions on this current episode if you have seen it, and I will look forward to those conversations in the comments below. And until the next video, y'all, oh boy, we have a ridiculous siege with Galadriel and orcs fighting a Region. This is going to be something. And tschüss.